The Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management, Peter Mayen Majongdit, met with members of the NGOs Forum Steering Committee, led by Executive Director of Ismail Again Africa Development Organization, Elijah Manyok. The Undersecretary in the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Gatwich Peter Kulang, says the meeting discussed importance of working together to provide humanitarian service despite the challenges.
We understand their presence in our areas, in our rural areas, are useful, but with the few resources that they have could not be able to serve the maximums or minimums which required to them to be done at the moment. The Minister, Honorable Peter Mayen, welcomed their visit, and we are honored with their works in the whole country.
Meanwhile, the Executive Director of Ismail Again Africa Development Organization, Elijah Manyok, says the meeting focused on the role of national NGOs during the coronavirus pandemic.
We actually had our concern with the minister, who has actually promised to work around with other stakeholders to be in a position to support local NGOs and other humanitarian actors in facilitating the humanitarian response across the country, including the critical supplies and as well as personnel that will be traveling to the field.
In another news development, Minister Peter Mayen Majongdit and a delegation from United Nations Office of Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs, UN OCHA, headed by Andrea Noyes, discussed how best the national NGOs will benefit from $35 million United States dollars.
And we also talked about the first standard allocation of the South Sudan Humanitarian Fund, which is a country-based pooled fund that is going to, in the coming weeks, allocate $35 million to support humanitarian response in South Sudan. And of that $35 million, about 41% of it will go to national NGOs. There are at least $10.8 million that national NGOs will benefit from, and we're working on the allocation of another 3.8 through sub-implementation that will go to putting national workers and national organizations at the front line of the humanitarian response.
Meanwhile, the Deputy Chairperson of Relief and Rehabilitation Commission, Santino Bol, pointed out that a conference will be held for national NGOs on ways of benefiting from the humanitarian grant.
We have emphasized on the capacity building, that the NGOs that have been funded needs a day or two workshops to be introduced to the critical challenges that the country is facing, so that they are really up to the objectives and the goals that we are standing for. This is mainly what is happening. It's also good to mention that World Food Program and other partners that are working closely with the UN families have stepped up the distribution of food. 2-month ratio has been distributed in most parts of the country and to continue.
Peter Mayen Majongdit, Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management, appreciated the efforts of the UN mission and international community for standing and supporting South Sudan.
We also included COVID-19 pandemic activities across all the projects, and those would be funding. We also talked about finding a possible additional funding specifically for COVID-19. We discussed with them 100 days plans for the ministry in order to be able to respond to the humanitarian situation that has come as a result of the COVID-19, which we know has affected the livelihood of the people of South Sudan, and particularly the most vulnerable people.
The national NGOs will get more than 41% from the humanitarian grant, and UN agencies will get 10%, and the rest for the international organizations. Martin Justin Paul Kose, SSBC, Juba.